The Freeway Phantom. Who was this elusive killer? Who leaves behind nothing but fear, confusion, and one haunting question? Who was the Freeway Phantom? The story of the Freeway Phantom isn't just about a killer. It's about the way he eluded justice, the way he became a figure of urban legend. It's about a time when a city's dark side bled into the streets, and no one knew who to trust. And it's about a mystery that, over 50 years later, still hasn't been solved. It was 1971. Washington, D.C. was a city still reeling from the social turbulence of the previous decade. The unrest, the protests, and the scars of the civil rights movement shaped the streets. But for many, life carried on as usual. Yet beneath the surface of this seemingly peaceful city, something dark was lurking. The first of the Phantom's victims was a 13-year-old girl named Carol Spinks. On April 25th, Carol left her home in southeast Washington to run an errand at the corner store. She was expected to be back soon, but Carol never made it home. The days that followed were a blur of searching, of growing fear among the residents of her neighborhood. Her parents waited, desperate for news, but none came. It wasn't until a few days later that Carol's body was found dumped near the Anacostia Freeway, in an area where few would go. The authorities had no leads, no evidence. No one had seen anything. No one could explain what had happened, let alone why. And it didn't end there. Carol Spinks wasn't the only victim. As the months went by, the killings continued. 5 more girls, ranging in age from 10 to 18, disappeared from the streets of D.C. and nearby Maryland. Each one was last seen in their neighborhood, but none of them were found until days later, their bodies discarded like trash along isolated highways. In July of 1971, 12-year-old Diane Williams vanished after leaving a friend's house. Less than a week later, her body was discovered near the Beltway, the same freeway system that would later define the name of the killer. Each murder seemed to follow a familiar pattern. Young girls, vulnerable, taken in broad daylight, their lives cruelly snuffed out. And yet, every time the police thought they had a lead, the killer slipped away. There were no suspects, no connections, no clear motives, only more pain, more loss, and more confusion. By the time the media had caught on, the public was on edge. The Freeway Phantom, named after the highways where the bodies were dumped, became an entity, a shadow hanging over Washington, D.C. But who was he? In the midst of the terror, one of the most unsettling clues emerged. On September 5th, 1971, 14-year-old Brenda Woodard was found murdered along the highway. She too had been strangled, just like the others. But it wasn't just her body that made the discovery strange. Inside Brenda's pocket was a note. The words were precise, written with careful handwriting, as if the killer had been composing it for a while. The note read, "This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women." The message was cryptic, chilling, and deliberately vague. But it was a clue that only raised more questions. Was this a message meant for the police? A taunt? A confession, or something more sinister? No one could be sure. The Phantom had always kept his identity hidden, but this note seemed like the only time he'd tried to speak directly to anyone. The killer's confidence was unnerving. He wasn't just taking lives, he was playing a dangerous game, leaving behind a message with no answers. It was a chilling glimpse into the mind of a man who didn't fear being caught, a man who might never be found. The hunt for the Freeway Phantom was frustrating. The police, the FBI, and local detectives were all involved. They questioned witnesses. They gathered evidence. They scoured neighborhoods, hoping for a tip, anything that could lead them to the killer. But despite their best efforts, every trail went cold. Without the technology we have today, they were left to rely on eyewitness reports, hunches, and old-fashioned detective work. Yet the more they searched, the more the killer seemed to vanish into thin air. The lack of clues was maddening. Every victim had been abducted in similar ways. All were young girls, mostly black, abducted from predominantly black neighborhoods. But nothing stood out that could connect them in any other way. No eyewitnesses, no fingerprints, no DNA. Just a series of bodies, dropped off in the same desolate spots. The police couldn't even decide if the killings were the work of a lone individual or if they were part of something larger. The Freeway Phantom was a phantom indeed, a shadow that was nearly impossible to catch. Over the years, many suspects came forward. Theories about the Phantom's identity were endless. Some believed he might have been a local man, someone who knew the neighborhoods well and used that knowledge to his advantage. Others thought he could have been someone with a deep personal connection to the victims, targeting specific girls for reasons that remained hidden. One theory suggested the killer might have been a police officer, someone with insider knowledge of the city's layout, who was able to avoid detection. The idea was chilling. Was the Freeway Phantom someone who could blend into the community? Someone who had the trust of others, only to turn that trust against them? Another theory pointed to a gang, a group of men who might have been working together, preying on young girls, operating in secrecy. But while these theories filled the airwaves, none could be proven. Theories came and went, but the identity of the Freeway Phantom remained a mystery. One suspect who stood out was Robert Askins, a convicted killer who had a history of violent crimes. He was arrested in connection with another case, and police even considered him a possible suspect. However, despite his dark past, there was no concrete evidence linking Askins to the Freeway Phantom murders. He was ruled out, just like many others. The Freeway Phantom had become a ghost, a figure who eluded capture, leaving behind a trail of dead ends and dead girls. For the families of the victims, the case was an unending nightmare. They lived with the pain of never knowing who was responsible for their daughters' deaths. With each passing year, the killer seemed to drift further into legend, a mystery so vast and elusive, it became harder to believe it was even real. As the years turned to decades, the Freeway Phantom faded into a chilling, almost mythical figure in the public's mind. The case went cold, but the memories never left. The families of the victims still held on to hope. And yet, no one ever came forward. No one was ever brought to justice. The killer's identity remained hidden. The freeway was still there, still echoing with the hum of passing cars. But for those who remembered, it would never be the same. The Freeway Phantom had left his mark, and that mark was one of fear, unanswered questions, and unresolved grief. In the end, the case of the Freeway Phantom is a chilling reminder of the dark mysteries that sometimes slip through the cracks of justice. Even as technology has evolved, there are still killers who slip through our grasp, their identities hidden in plain sight. Was the Freeway Phantom a man? A monster? Or was he something else entirely? A ghost story that continues to haunt the streets of Washington, D.C. For the families of the victims, for the people who lived through those dark years, the question remains: who was the Freeway Phantom?